academic freedom because I never believed it existed in the first place. So she says, okay, if we're agreed on that, then we shoot for a settlement with the pool. And the settlement has to have two components. One, there has to be an acknowledgement by the pool that it had libeled me during that last year. And indeed, they did at the end acknowledge I was an excellent teacher and a prodigious scholar. And then there had to be a financial component to the settlement. We argued, we negotiated, we debated, we fought. It was ugly, mostly. In the end, there was a settlement, and I chose the settlement, and I didn't go back to the pool. Does that mean I didn't have a right to return? Oh, no. I certainly did have a right. But if you don't want me to return, and the pool sure as heck did not want me to return, you have to offer a reasonable settlement. And I don't think, in principle, the settlement is different with the Palestinians. Number one, Israel has to acknowledge the colossal injustice it inflicted on the Palestinians in 1948. They have to acknowledge that. The official position of Israel is we will not accept any moral, historical, legal responsibility for what happened to the refugees. Well, that's a non-starter. If the poll said to me, we're not going to issue a statement, I would say, then we're going to court, and I'm coming back. Israel cannot begin by saying, we don't accept any responsibility for anything. That's a non-starter. And then there has to be some sort of financial offer. Now, does that mean the Palestinians will accept it? I don't know. I can't tell you that. What I can tell you is, I'm no expert on Palestinians, but I spend quite a lot of time there. I have a lot of very close friends. One in particular, Musa Abu Heshesh, from Fawar camp outside Hebron. And he tells me frankly, he says, Norman, I'm very conservative on this right of return. And he takes me to the place where he and his family grew up, a tiny little hovel in Fawar camp, one room, very large family. And he says, I'm not going to give up that right so easily. So I said, okay, then what do you want? And he says, let them make us an offer. Let me see the offer. I think most Palestinians are reasonable. There are ways to resolve the conflict. The problem is not insurmountable obstacles. And the problem is not that the Palestinians are unreasonable. The problem is Israel wants everything. Israel doesn't want to acknowledge, accept the most elementary, basic principles of international law. The Palestinians renounced their claim to 78% of Palestine, and what did Israel do? It comes along and decides we're going to build a wall, and we're going to keep another 12% of the West Bank. And we're going to keep the best water resources in the West Bank. And we're going to keep the most productive agricultural lands in the West Bank. And we're going to build this wall so it circles the aerial settlement in the north and cuts the northern sector in half. Then it's going to build this wall to encircle Ma'ale Adunim in the center and cut the middle in half, bisect the West Bank in the middle. And then, after chopping it up, reducing it to fragments, stealing everything worth settling, they say, that's our offer. And that's the problem. Be reasonable. acknowledge the wrong that was inflicted. I think the conflict can be settled. You have to be honest about that. It's not my opinion. It's not my opinion. You have to ask yourself one simple question, and you have to keep repeating the question over and over again. Why is it every year the whole world on one side, Israel, the United States, Nauru, Palau, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia on the other? Why is that? Is the whole world anti-Semitic except for Nauru, Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands? Are all 15 justices on the International Court of Justice anti-Semitic? All 15, including the one dissenter on the major vote, Bergenthal from the United States, a Holocaust survivor. All 15 said all the settlements are illegal under international law. Are all 15 judges anti-Semitic? Is Thomas Bergenthal, a Holocaust survivor, anti-Semitic? Is Rosalind Higgins, the British judge, who's Jewish by birth, is she anti-Semitic? Or is the problem that Israel, backed by the United States, they only want one thing from the Palestinians, only one thing from the Arab people. They want submission, submission, submission. And I don't think the Arabs or the Palestinians are obliged to submit to this state.
My question is related to, if you look at the list of all, if you read the biographies and autobiographies of all the prime ministers and the demography of Israel population, you find there is a significant number of them are Russians who either came in from Russia via the United States to Palestine and became Israel, or they are Russian Palestinians, I would call them. And if you look at the demography, there were millions of Russians who came to settle. Some of them were not even Jews. I think they were called as Nazis recently. I wonder what is your comment on looking at it from a nationalist line rather than looking at it as religious lines or Holocaust lines, and see what is the impact of the demography of the population on the Palestinians and on the Israeli population, because I think there is a lot of racism within the Israeli population as well, and also the dominant role the Russians are playing in it. And I also wonder if you consider Jews as a human shield of the American and British Empire, just as the Pakistanis or the Muslims in Pakistan are the human shield which were created by the British to fight the Hindus. Thank you.
I'm not sure how useful it is to trace back who came from where, and are they really Jewish, and whether they were converts, they were originally Palestinians, and then they converted. I don't think it's useful to get involved in this kind of undertaking, because it just drags in all sorts of extraneous issues. This is not a clash of religions. It's not a clash of civilizations. There are basic political issues that are at stake, and in the most contemporary form, I'm not saying always, but in the most contemporary form, the problem is an occupation of another people's homeland, the systematic destruction of that homeland, the attempts to annex parts of that homeland, and the attempts to destroy what remains. And I think the most useful language is to use the language which the sponsors of this event use. Students for Palestinian human right.